This video is sponsored by Call of War, a free online player versus player strategy game where you can lead a real nation during World War II. Research and make best use of tanks, aircraft and other weapons to fight with up to 100 real players at a time in exciting real-time combat. Declare war on your neighbours or forge alliances as strong as the Allies in World War II. Fight battles and take over the world in hard-fought campaigns that can last weeks. Call of War is cross-platform, so you can compete with your friends on both PC and mobile on the same account to find out who is the ultimate general. The Operations Room fans who sign up by clicking the unique link below will receive 13,000 gold and a month of premium subscription completely free. Don't miss out, as the offer is only available for 30 days, so click the link in the description below, choose your country, and start fighting your way to victory. On the 19th of December 1944, British Field Marshal Sir Bernard Montgomery was deeply concerned. 3 days earlier, the German army had launched a surprise counter-offensive which punched through thinly held American lines in the Ardennes forest. Montgomery sensed that his 21st Army Group stretching from the North Sea to Belgium was in danger, and he wasn't being told the full picture. He decided to send 2 of his liaison officers to the US 1st Army headquarters in the Belgian town of Spa. After a perilous drive through freezing fog, the British staff officers arrived in Spa only to find the headquarters completely deserted. Captain Carol Martha noted at the time, "A hurried evacuation has evidently taken place. The tables in the dining room are laid for Christmas festivities. The German attack is more serious than we had thought, for the evacuation of the headquarters shows every sign of a panic move." Armed with this information, Montgomery immediately ordered Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks' 30 Corps to prepare to move south to secure the vital crossings of the Meuse River. He then placed a call to Major General John Whiteley, the senior British operations officer at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. Montgomery requested that Whiteley suggest to Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower that he be put in command of all Allied forces north of the expanding German-held Bulge in the front lines. Eisenhower made the decision to fulfill Montgomery's request. This proved to be the correct move. Allied command was better coordinated from this point forward, which played a large role in defeating the German offensive. However, it would also be the culmination of years of bilateral tension, jealousy and arrogance which defined relations between top American commanders and Montgomery. There is little doubt that Montgomery was one of the most prominent and successful commanders of the Second World War, with major victories in North Africa, Italy, northern France and in the Ardennes, albeit with some high-profile failures, and that he was beloved and respected by the men he commanded. In this video, we will examine why Montgomery was so personally hated by the Americans and the effect this had on the Western Front of the Second World War. The animosity surrounding Montgomery began in 1943 as the Allies were crushing the German and Italian armies in North Africa. At this time, Montgomery was a lieutenant general who had commanded the British 8th Army since August of 1942. Beginning with the Second Battle of El Alamein, Montgomery led 8th Army to spectacular victories over Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps and played a major role in destroying the Axis presence in North Africa. Montgomery was widely considered to be a sound commander who had excellent grasp on operational warfare. He considered himself a soldier's soldier and often visited his men at the front lines to boost their morale. Furthermore, his victories in the North African campaign had made him a celebrity figure in the UK, where he was already being lionised as the greatest British general of the war. However, Montgomery's personality made him a nightmare to work with. Historian James Holland summed up his temperament. Montgomery's great failing was his social awkwardness. He simply did not know how to interact with others. Montgomery could be spectacularly rude and discourteous. Even those who knew and admired Monty were bewildered by his shameless and egotistical manner. Chief of the Imperial General Staff, Sir Alan Brooke, often mentioned this in his war diary. One passage reads, "I had to haul him over the coals for his usual lack of tact and egotistical outlook, which prevented him from appreciating other people's feelings." Some modern historians, such as Antony Beevor, have even suggested that Montgomery had some mild form of autism. Whether or not he was indeed on the spectrum, these qualities did not endear Monty to many of his peers. After the final pockets of enemy resistance in Tunisia was snuffed out in May of 1943, planning began in earnest for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. This marked the first time that Montgomery was forced to work with Commander of the US 7th Army, Lieutenant General George Patton, and Commander of 2nd Corps, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley. Planning for this major combined armed amphibious operation proved to be exceedingly difficult, as the Allied staff clashed with each other over strategy. Montgomery disliked the initial invasion plans, which he believed dispersed Allied forces too much. He instead drew up his own proposal to concentrate the landings on southern Sicily. This version was eventually accepted by Eisenhower, who was then Commander-in-Chief of the Allied Expeditionary Force. But Monty's pompous and conceited manner annoyed many, especially the Americans who believed he was only seeking to boost his own reputation. On the night of the 9th of June 1943, the Allies landed on Sicily, and tensions between Montgomery and the Americans spiked considerably. No man was less enthused with having to work with Monty than Patton. Whereas Montgomery tended to favour meticulous set-piece battles, which gave him a perhaps misunderstood reputation as being overly cautious, Patton was an aggressive and sometimes even reckless commander who believed in attacking no matter the situation. Patton soon became exasperated, having to liaise with Montgomery, who displayed his usual lack of tact in their interactions. One day, Patton visited Monty's headquarters for a council of war, but left incensed after he was gifted a cheap cigar lighter and wasn't served lunch. For a proud and frankly vain man, these small gestures led Patton to consider Montgomery his nemesis. More importantly, Montgomery's original plan for conquering Sicily essentially gave Patton and the Americans a mere supporting role, while the British forces would liberate the major population centres. Determined to make his own mark on the campaign, Patton ignored Monty's plan and forged ahead in a race for the city of Messina, which US 7th Army eventually captured before the British. Montgomery was unbothered by losing the race for Messina, but this contributed further to bad blood between the two commanders. The Allies next landed in southern Italy in late 1943, and Montgomery led 8th Army north before he was recalled to Britain to begin planning for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. In preparation for Overlord, Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Allied Commander and needed to install a commander of ground forces for the invasion. Both he and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill preferred General Sir Harold Alexander for the post. However, General Brooke intervened and argued not unreasonably that Montgomery was a better operational commander well suited for the combined arms assault on Normandy. Eisenhower agreed, and Montgomery was assigned to command 21st Army Group, as well as all Allied ground forces. Unlike planning for the invasion of Sicily, Montgomery and the rest of the Allied staff worked in relative harmony on Operation Overlord. However, the invasion itself would bring even more tension between Monty and the Americans. Based on the successes in Sicily, Monty proposed Caen as a phase line target for D-Day itself, in order to allow the Allies to break out of the beachhead and make for open ground better suited for armoured thrusts. Eisenhower and Montgomery seemed to be in agreement that the British and Canadian forces would seize Caen in the first days to allow the Americans and Commonwealth armies to break out together. Yet, when the invasion began, the British and Canadians found themselves at the brunt of an immediate German armoured counterattack, failing to seize Caen on day one. Here, Montgomery displayed the characteristics which made him such an able commander, but also an insufferable person to work with. He correctly assessed that the best chance for victory was for the British and Canadians to grind down the powerful and concentrated German armoured forces in front of Caen to allow the Americans to break out to the west. After several attritional and costly battles, enough German forces had been drawn to the Commonwealth sector to allow Operation Cobra, the American breakout, to succeed. Less than a month later, the German Western Front had been routed, and Allied forces paraded down the streets of liberated Paris. Arguably, but perhaps not unreasonably if so, Monty did not consider these phase lines to be hard objectives, but more an outline plan from which to adapt based on circumstances on the ground. For example, the unexpected concentration and counterattack of such a powerful German armoured force around Caen. Conversely, some would consider these to be hard objectives, and therefore the D-Day Caen objective to be a failure. Where Monty's phase line to capture Caen on D-Day was not successful, the phase line to liberate Paris in September was achieved early, arguably a much more important achievement. However, again doing himself no favours, he claimed that he had never intended to capture Caen, and that his so-called master plan had played out exactly how he envisioned. We're simply expressing that in this case the cliché that no plan survives first contact with the enemy would have, if anything, positively demonstrated his capabilities as an excellent and adaptive operational commander. Simply bluntly denying any intention of capturing Caen inevitably caused headaches for Eisenhower and eye rolls among Montgomery's peers. Now that the enemy was on the run, there was a new strategic dilemma. How would the Allies get into Germany? Having replaced Montgomery as overall ground commander, Eisenhower decided on a broad front strategy, where the Allied armies across France would advance as one at a steady pace. This was mostly done as a way to smooth over political concerns, as any one nation given priority in supplies and strategy might cause cracks to form in the fragile alliance. Nonetheless, Montgomery advocated for a narrow front strategy, where his 21st Army Group, composed mostly of Commonwealth forces, would be given absolute priority in supplies. On the surface, Monty's proposal made sense. He argued that he was best positioned to sweep north through the Low Countries and capture the key port of Antwerp, which would solve a developing supply crisis. Yet, his lack of tact caused problems yet again, as he vigorously pushed his narrow front strategy without consideration to the underlying political issues. He annoyed the usually stoic Eisenhower with his demands to stop General Bradley's 12th Army Group and General Patton's 3rd Army and send their supplies to his forces. After one particularly fractious tirade, Eisenhower put his hand on Montgomery's knee and gently told him, "Monty, you can't speak to me like that, I'm your boss." To placate Montgomery, Eisenhower decided to promote him to Field Marshal, which only succeeded in infuriating his American commanders. Even though Montgomery and Bradley were equals in command, Montgomery now technically outranked him. Patton wrote to his wife, "The Field Marshal thing made us sick. That is Bradley and me." Even the Allied Naval Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Sir Bertrand Ramsay, wrote in his diary, "Monty made a Field Marshal. Astounding thing to do, and I regret it more than I can say. Damn stupid." Despite Eisenhower's best efforts at diplomacy, relations between his subordinates continued to deteriorate. This was not helped by the fact that Montgomery and Bradley were now executing competing strategies for how to advance east. While Monty's 21st Army Group advanced along the English Channel towards the North German plain, Bradley's much larger 12th Army Group was striking towards the Ruhr. The newly minted British Field Marshal held his American counterpart in high regard, describing Bradley as dependable and loyal, but he often worked to undermine 12th Army Group's supply situation. This was especially evident when Montgomery hatched the idea for airborne landings in the Netherlands, which eventually became Operation Market Garden. Hoping to find the decisive breakthrough into Germany, Monty went behind Bradley's back to get approval from Eisenhower. General Bradley was predictably furious at not being consulted and objected to the operation. Eisenhower approved of the plan. Market Garden ended in failure, resulting in a black mark on Montgomery's wartime record. The previously cordial relationship between Monty and Bradley broke down completely, but that is not to say that Bradley wasn't to blame as well. He had cultivated a reputation as a modest and soft-spoken GI's general. However, it seemed the higher Bradley rose in the ranks, the more publicity-obsessed he became. Walter Bedell Smith summed up his frustration with the two men. "It is amazing how good commanders get ruined when they develop a public they have to act up to. They become prima donnas." One of Bradley's staff officers later remarked that the general had long since acquired a distaste for the little man with the beret and the bark. The Battle of the Bulge proved to be the final straw in the feud between Monty and the Americans. On the 16th of December 1944, the German offensive smashed right into US 1st Army, which was thinly spread across the front. 1st Army's commander, Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges, panicked in the face of the attack and evacuated his forward headquarters by the 19th of December. This is when Field Marshal Montgomery officially requested that he take temporary command of the American forces in the northern sector of the enemy breakthrough. Although he was no fan of Montgomery, Bedell-Smith was disappointed with the conduct of Hodges and believed Bradley had too much on his plate to deal with the situation on his own. Eisenhower agreed and transferred command of the US 1st and 9th Armies to Monty the following day. When Bedell-Smith informed Bradley of this decision, he was predictably outraged. He phoned Eisenhower and threatened to resign, to which the Supreme Commander responded, "Your resignation means absolutely nothing." He then ended the conversation with, "Well, Brad, those are my orders," before hanging up. Privately, Bradley acknowledged that Montgomery taking command of the northern flank was entirely logical, but he was far too proud to state this publicly. Monty quickly set about reorganising the units involved in the fighting, while calling reinforcements to block any German advance towards the Meuse River. Brian Horrocks' 30 Corps blocked the Meuse crossings, while Montgomery planned and led the Allied counterattack against the Bulge. While most historians agree that Montgomery's actions did not in themselves win the battle, his conduct did steady the front and ensured there would be no German breakthrough across the Meuse. Although Montgomery received heavy criticism after the war for the slow Allied counterattack against the Bulge, the roads and weather were likely far too poor for a faster advance. As a field commander, Montgomery's command of the Battle of the Bulge was sound, and another important Allied victory. The same cannot be said for Monty's outward handling of the battle. With tensions between the Field Marshal and the Americans already on the verge of boiling over, Montgomery called a press conference on the 7th of January 1945, as the Allies were slowly pushing back the enemy advance. Monty praised the bravery of the American GIs along with Eisenhower's leadership, but the press conference was mostly self-promoting. He boasted that Eisenhower had put him in command to save the situation and failed to acknowledge any other American commander. But his greatest mistake was insinuating that British ground forces deserved equal credit for the victory. While Britons and Canadians contributed to the counterattack, the battle had been fought predominantly by American young men. Montgomery's press conference was a complete disaster. German propaganda pounced on the fiasco to stoke tensions between the Western Allies, while Bradley, Patton and Hodges all threatened to resign unless Montgomery was sacked. Eisenhower, along with his British deputy Sir Arthur Tedder, decided to remove Monty from command, but the Supreme Commander was convinced by Bedell-Smith and Montgomery's Chief of Staff to allow him to apologise. For Monty, this was a rare moment of self-reflection. He wrote after the war, "I think now that I should never have held that press conference. So great were the feelings against me on the part of the American generals, that whatever I said was bound to be wrong. I should therefore have said nothing. But the damage had been done, and there would be consequences for the controversial British Field Marshal." In the end, Bradley and Patton got their revenge. After months of fighting with Eisenhower for priority in supplies, Montgomery's 21st Army Group spent the rest of the war protecting the northern flank of Bradley's 12th Army Group, while his forces crossed the Rhine River. Montgomery uncharacteristically accepted his reduced role without much protest, perhaps knowing he was on the thinnest of ice. He remained in command until Germany surrendered and the war in Europe came to an end. After the war, Monty served as Chief of the Imperial General Staff and Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe in NATO until his retirement in 1958. He then released his memoirs, which were predictably self-promoting and insulting to his American peers. Call of War is a free online player versus player strategy game that takes place in World War II. Click the link in the description below for 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium for free. Choose your country and fight your way to victory today.